Hello, welcome to Eye on Africa. Thanks for joining us. I'm Rochelle Harrison-Pless. Coming up, a show of defiance in Togo. Anti-government protesters remain determined to hit the streets despite a ban on weekday demonstrations. The latest violent clashes in the capital, leaving several people injured. Kenya's election board chief holds emergency talks just 1 week before the country's presidential vote rerun. A crucial crisis meeting snubbed by President Uhuru Kenyatta. Plus, we take a look at the new Yves Saint Laurent museum in Marrakech, Morocco's Red City, a source of inspiration and second home for the late iconic French designer. Good to have you with us. Refusing to back down, opposition protesters in Togo continue to hit the streets, a show of defiance despite authorities banning weekday demonstrations. Clashes erupted in the capital Lomé on Thursday, with police and anti-government protesters going head-to-head. At least 5 people were injured and some 60 people arrested. This a day after the violence claimed the lives of 5 people.
Lomé still bears the scars from riots that erupted on Wednesday. Police officers and the military were deployed across the capital. Young protesters erected barricades but were quickly dispersed. In Bay, a traditionally pro-opposition and working-class district, this family is still shaken up by the recent violence that rocked their neighbourhood. The military searched their home for protesters.
They forced the door down to get into the bedroom. The children were there. When the children saw the soldiers, they fainted and fell straight to the floor.
I'm scared for my life, for the life of my wife and my children's lives.
Residents have little means of protecting themselves from these intrusions. In another home, these human rights activists claim they were physically assaulted. This teenager says men in uniform came into his bedroom and beat him up.
The anti-gang unit came and forced the door open and came inside my house. When they were done beating me up, they put me in their car. God knows where they were going, but thank God I fell out of the car, and then I ran away.
Human rights activists and the Togolese people have started to speak out about a number of masked men spreading terror.
The police and the security forces are doing this. There were also militiamen on the ground, like in the neighborhood of Bay. Over the last 2 months, it's just gotten worse and worse.
The security minister condemns violence on both sides.
These are young people from the neighborhood who have organized themselves. As soon as their wives and sisters saw their stalls overturned and saw the rubbish bins overturned in front of their houses, they saw the women being beaten, they decided to organize themselves, whether they were militias or self-defense groups. I condemn the violence on both sides.
In many areas, shops remained closed and main roads were deserted.
The Kenyan leader has turned his back on a crisis meeting called by the chief of the country's electoral commission. Instead, Uhuru Kenyatta said he would spend time on the campaign trail, just 1 week out from a presidential vote rerun. It comes a day after a top election official fled to the United States, saying the ballot could not be free, fair or credible. Now, despite the snub by Kenyatta, Election Board Chairman Wafula Chebukati met with opposition leader Raila Odinga. He said he could reconsider his decision to drop out of the disputed race. Our correspondent Julia Steers has more from Nairobi.
There's been an incredible amount of effort put into working towards a political solution from civil society, from the religious community here in Kenya, and from the diplomatic presence here in Kenya. But that said, it's unlikely that Odinga will have a full change of heart at this point. He's quite dug into his position to boycott the polls next week, and there's no really firm indication to that end from the Electoral Commission. All along, Odinga has said he would meet with the commission. He showed up today, which, as you said, was in contrast with President Kenyatta, who insists that the commission should remain independent and that he doesn't have a need to meet with him. Chebukati, the chairman of the commission, has said that he needs to meet with both Odinga and Kenyatta in order to reach a solution to this growing political crisis. But Odinga's real sticking point here is the staffing issue within the IEBC. So even though some of his demands have been met, that they have made some improvements to work towards a more fair and credible election, people around him say it's highly unlikely at this point that he will reverse course on this critical issue unless, of course, some high-level staff members at the IEBC are changed before next week's election.
Now, what else came out of this crisis meeting? We had two top election officials both saying that this rerun may not be free or fair. So what's next?
Right. These two statements yesterday and this one election official fleeing the country really got people here worried that this election next week is completely unrealistic. But election experts based here and international diplomats dealing with both sides have in fact said that technically speaking, the commission has implemented some changes and reforms and has in fact actually accomplished much of what Odinga has demanded in terms of changes to the technical voting and tallying process. They say that a credible election could be technically possible, but that the political pressure from both sides on this commission is actually what's calling into question the credibility of an election next week and eroding public trust in this institution. So the sticking point, as I said, is the staffing issue. Odinga rejoining the race is highly unlikely unless that is addressed. And if the election is held 1 week from today, another huge concern is that the boycott of the polls that Odinga has called for could turn violent, that his supporters might prevent people from voting, or that protests on the day of the election could be met with a large show of force from authorities. So that's what's at stake here. And in terms of what's next, as I said, people are working very hard here to try and force these two sides to come to a political solution.
Next, Nigerian police have arrested 4 people in connection with the kidnapping of 4 Britons in the country's southern Delta state. The group was abducted last week. They were Christian missionaries who were providing medical aid to isolated communities. Kidnapping by criminal gangs is common in southern Nigeria. Local authorities say the main suspects are a militant group called the Caraway. And we finish in Marrakech, where the new Yves Saint Laurent Museum has opened its doors to the public. Morocco's Red City was the late fashion designer's spiritual home. The iconic French couturier greatly inspired by Marrakechi colours and style. Thursday's unveiling comes just weeks after the inauguration of another museum dedicated to Yves Saint Laurent, right here in Paris. Alex Jennings reports.
A celebration of his work in his spiritual home. Before he first came to Morocco in the 60s, the legendary French designer Yves Saint Laurent was renowned for working in black. But that was about to change. Marrakech soon became his second home. It was here he bought a villa with his partner Pierre Berger and took over the spectacular Majorelle garden. Quito Fierro is the garden's director. He knew the designer personally.
It was here that he was inspired by many things. The colours, Moroccan clothing, everything there was to discover from strolling through the Medina, the rich crafts, the tiles. For him, Marrakech was a revelation of colour.
The museum will showcase Saint Laurent's groundbreaking designs as well as photos retracing the designer's life and career. It's giving back to the Oka city that provided the designer with so much inspiration.
The Moroccans discovered the influence of their culture and the importance of their heritage in the work of Yves Saint Laurent. And that is where the idea to create a museum dedicated to Yves Saint Laurent here in Marrakech comes from.
The museum is the brainchild of the designer's partner in business and life, Pierre Berger, who passed away last month.
Well, that's it for now. Stay with us here on France 24. Lots more news coming up. Don't go away.